My parents said there was no space for my children at Thanksgiving, yet they invited my brother's entire family. They even told me, "We love his kids more." By the time they realized I had cut off their support, it was already too late. I don't quite remember the exact moment when I realized, but if I had to choose the first sign, it would probably be that morning, when I held the Thanksgiving invitation card sent by my mother from our hometown. The card had a formal font, printed with images of orange and yellow leaves, and warm-looking words. "We are about to share another wonderful Thanksgiving together. Ethan and Olivia's family, along with dear little Henry and Leo, eagerly awaiting our reunion." I turned the card over, waiting to see my name, Noah's name, and our two kids' names, Sophie and Caleb. But there was nothing. Just a cold blank space, quieter than any words could ever be. At first I lied to myself. Maybe it's just a printing mistake. Maybe Mom accidentally sent an unfinished version. I called her. Her voice floated gently over the phone. "Oh, it was just a little mistake, sweetheart. Don't think too much about it." Her voice was as light as mist. But like mist, it was cold and impossible to grasp. Even so, I still made preparations. I picked out a cream-colored knit dress for Sophie, a small striped shirt for Caleb. We had never missed a single Thanksgiving before. Because even in those awkward moments, even when I caught my mother gazing at Ethan's kids with a pride that was almost too obvious, I still believed, somehow, family would always be home. But other signs began to reveal themselves more clearly. One day, when I dropped by my parents' house to deliver some documents, I found my mother and Olivia busy wrapping gifts. Bright, colorful boxes stacked high, with cards attached that read, "For dear Henry," "For sweet Leo," "Sophie and Caleb." Not a single package. Mother smiled when she caught my gaze. "Don't worry about it, sweetheart. Just getting a few things ready for Ethan's kids. Your little ones are still young. They don't need much yet. Don't need much yet. Don't need to be seen yet. Don't need to be loved. At least not like Henry and Leo were loved." I walked out of that house with a smile frozen on my face, but my hands were clenched so tightly, they turned white. Noah, my husband, often told me, "Clara, you don't have to keep forcing yourself. It's not your fault they don't know how to love you right." I knew he was right, but part of me, the small part, the part that once sat curled up by the staircase, watching my mother praise Ethan just for tying his shoelaces properly, still ached to touch something called fairness. A week before Thanksgiving, the fateful call came. I remember it clearly. I was folding Caleb's toys, fixing Sophie's princess dress, getting everything ready. The phone rang. "Mom," flashed on the screen. I picked up, my voice bright. "Hi, Mom. I was just getting the kids' clothes ready." On the other end, there was a pause, just a single breath, but it stretched out like a whole winter. Then my mother said, "Clara, this year, Thanksgiving's gonna be a little different. We think it should just be for adults." I froze, the tiny sweater in my hands turning to stone. Sophie was just 7. Caleb hadn't even turned 4 yet. What had they ever done except fill the house with innocent laughter? I tried to stay calm. "So, no kids at all, Mom?" Once again, that deadly hesitation. Then my mother sighed. "No, what I mean is, just not your kids. Ethan's family, you know, Henry and Leo, are well-behaved, quiet, polite, more pleasant to have around with the adults." I gripped the phone, feeling every cell in my chest shatter. Sophie and Caleb. Not well-behaved enough. Not polite enough to sit at the same table as Henry and Leo. We weren't good enough, I whispered. "If my kids aren't welcome, neither am I." A long, cold silence. Then my mother, with a voice colder than the first snow, replied, "Suit yourself," and hung up. I stood there, in my own kitchen, among the tiny pillows Caleb had stacked into a fortress, surrounded by Sophie's giggles echoing from the living room. And for the first time in a very long time, I stopped trying to find excuses for them. I realized I'd been standing outside of the family for a long time. They had just now finally put a label on the exclusion. That afternoon, the sky over Milwaukee sank into a dull, leaden gray. But the gray rain outside was still more bearable than the chill that had settled into my heart after the call with my mother. Sophie and Caleb, still unaware of anything, were sitting at the table, carefully assembling the little thank you cards I had prepared to send to their grandparents. Sophie's tiny hand clumsily wrote her name, the letters wobbly but brimming with sincerity. I leaned against the doorframe, watching them, and realized, if I agreed to endure it, if I showed up at that dinner without my children, I would become complicit. I would be the one teaching my children that love must be bought with suffering. That sometimes you must bow your head just to have a seat at a table where you are not truly welcome. No, I had lived enough of that lesson. I would not pass it down. That night, I sent my mother a brief text. "Thank you for the invitation. But if Sophie and Caleb are not welcome, I will respectfully stay home. Wishing everyone a happy Thanksgiving. I didn't wait for a response, didn't expect an apology, didn't hope for a late-coming miracle. I simply put the phone down, sat on the floor with Noah and the kids, and together we cut paper crafts, building a new world with our own hands. The next day, a text came from Ethan, as sharp as a blade. Mom says you're making a big deal out of nothing. Why do you always have to make everything so heavy? I looked at the message, strangely calm. If what I did to protect my children was considered heavy, then I would gladly carry that weight for a lifetime. I didn't respond. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I no longer needed to explain myself. Thanksgiving arrived with a biting cold. No roasted turkey, no long table draped in lace, only the sweet smell of pancakes, maple syrup in the air, and the sound of two little ones laughing as they sprinkled flour all over their father. Noah wrapped his arms around me from behind and whispered, "We're exactly where we're meant to be." I nodded and smiled. A smile that wasn't forced. Not defensive. As we sat eating breakfast, a table just big enough for four, my phone rang. Mom flashed on the screen. I looked at it, hesitated for a second, then let it ring until it stopped. A minute later, a ding announced a new message. I opened it. It was a photo, a large feast, a long table with a white cloth piled high with roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pies. At the center, Ethan, Olivia, Henry, and Leo were beaming, wrapped in the arms of my parents. No me, no Noah, no Sophie, no Caleb. The caption below, "Happy Thanksgiving to the most wonderful family." I sat there looking at the photo. The first feeling wasn't anger, wasn't pain. It was a hollow, peaceful emptiness, a simple truth. That door was never meant for me. Not because I didn't try hard enough, not because I didn't love enough, but because it was never truly home. I smiled softly and set the phone down. Sophie tugged at my hand. "Mommy, look, I built a pancake castle." Caleb shouted, "You eat first, Mommy. Only a queen gets the first bite." I knelt down between the two of them and pulled them into my arms. No white lace tablecloth on the floor. No glossy roast turkey. No photo op to flaunt. Only tiny, warm arms around me. Only laughter, rising like beams of sunlight. Only love, pure, unconditional. Noah sat down beside me, quietly taking my hand. "We're not missing a table," he said. "We're only missing the ones who no longer want to sit with us." I nodded, and in that moment I realized, family isn't a place you're invited to. Family is a place where you're never asked to prove you belong. That night, after the kids had fallen asleep, I stepped out onto the porch, wrapping a blanket around myself. I gazed up at the night sky. No fireworks, no spotlight, only distant stars, twinkling like the small, stubborn dreams of a little girl. Now grown, now building her own home free of conditions and unwritten rules. A home with enough room for anyone who knows how to love with their heart, not with a measuring stick. A week after Thanksgiving, as the first winter winds began sweeping across Milwaukee, I received an automated email from the bank. A short subject line that made me frown immediately. Unusual transaction alert. Verification required. I opened the email. There it was. A transaction of nearly $800 at a supermarket located 300 miles from my home, charged to a credit card under my name. At first, I assumed it was just a technical error. I carefully reviewed my recent transactions, and that was when I realized it wasn't just one. There were strange charges, large grocery purchases, gas station bills, even online orders, appearing regularly, month after month. I sank into the chair, my hands turning cold. I remembered vaguely, years ago when my father, Frank, underwent surgery. Back then, I had added my parents' card to my credit account as a temporary measure to make it easier for them to pay medical expenses and prescriptions. When they recovered, I simply forgot to revoke access. And my parents, without a word, without a single request for permission, had quietly continued using it as if it were their unspoken entitlement. I leaned back, the ceiling spinning overhead. I didn't know what hurt more. That they had been using my money for years without telling me, or that they could so easily cast my children aside from the family while benefiting from me without a shred of guilt. Noah found me sitting frozen in the living room. He knelt down, prying open my clenched hands. "What's wrong, babe?" I looked at him, my voice raw. I just found out who really needed me, and it wasn't out of love." I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, combing through every statement, tallying every charge. Each line of numbers felt like a tiny needle, each prick building into an ache that swallowed my chest whole. Some months, they spent nearly $2,000. One bill clearly listed, gifts for Henry and Leo. I let out a dry laugh. A sound so bitter that even I wouldn't have recognized it as my own. The next morning, I called the bank and requested to lock out all secondary account holders. I filed a dispute report for unauthorized transactions. The polite bank representative asked me, "Are you sure you want to revoke access for these users, Miss Clara? Please note that this action is irreversible." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. I'm sure. I knew I was drawing a line that could never be undone. But strangely, instead of guilt, what flooded me, relief. As if I had finally unshackled a heavy chain that had been dragging behind me for years. 3 days later, the phone rang. "Caller ID, Mom." I answered, keeping my voice steady. "Hello?" "Clara." My mother Margaret's voice screeched, trembling with fury. "Dad's card got declined. The store refused the transaction. What did you do?" I leaned against the wall, listening as her anger erupted like a small hurricane. "Clara, don't be so selfish. Families help each other. Do you even know how much your father and I sacrificed for you?" I responded calmly. "I've helped enough, and I don't owe anyone the right to drain me dry just because it's expected. How could you abandon us when we're struggling?" Her voice cracked, as if I had stabbed her heart. But I kept my tone level. "You're not struggling. You've just gotten used to living off me without asking." On the other end, my mother fell silent for 2 heavy breaths. Then she hung up. Not long after, a courier delivered an express envelope to my house. Inside was a demand letter, signed by Margaret and Frank, insisting I pay nearly $80,000, itemized as costs of raising me from age 18. Tuition, clothing, toys, healthcare. Incalculable sacrifices, now conveniently assigned cold hard numbers. I laughed. Not a happy laugh, not even a mocking one, but the hollow, bitter laugh of someone who had finally seen the truth. To them, love had never been priceless. It had always come with a price tag. I just had never been allowed to see it. That night, as Noah read through the letter, he looked up at me, his eyes dark. "What are you gonna do?" I sat down, folded the letter carefully, like one would fold the remains of a burnt page. "I'm not gonna pay it. I'm not going to apologize. I'm going to live, owing nothing to anyone, not even to so-called blood ties." Noah didn't ask anything more. He just wrapped his arms around me, and in that embrace, for the first time in years, I knew. I was free. Truly free. I held the demand letter in my hands quietly, studying the neat black ink, the neatly typed numbers. Each line jabbed at my skin like a tiny needle. Milk money, doctor's visits, textbooks, dinners in the kitchen I once thought was home. They had put a price on love. They had assigned a cost to every night I ever slept under their roof. Noah rested a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to go if you're not ready." I shook my head, folded the letter carefully, and tucked it into my coat pocket. Not because I was ready, but because I no longer needed to be ready to defend myself. That afternoon, as winter sunlight slanted across the silent rows of houses, I drove back to the town where I grew up. Every street, every corner was painfully familiar, as if they too had watched me chase approval from people who had never intended to give it. When I pulled up to the old house, my mother Margaret was already waiting on the porch. My father Frank lurked behind the curtains, his figure heavy and cold like a stone monument. I stepped out of the car, my coat whipping in the cold wind. I brought no one with me. No Noah, no Sophie, no Caleb. Just myself. And for the first time, that didn't make me feel alone. My mother opened the door, a smile stiff as plaster on her face. "Clara, I'm glad you've come to your senses." I stepped across the threshold without answering, breathing in the musty old air, mixed with a faint scent of mint tea. Every footstep echoed through a thick, weighted silence. In the living room on the table lay another copy of the demand letter, flattened neatly with a pen placed carefully beside it. I stood still, as if looking at the sentence they had long ago written for a daughter who never quite measured up. My father stepped out from behind the curtains, his voice heavy. "We don't want to make this difficult, Clara, but everyone must pay for what they've received." I smiled lightly. A smile that never touched my eyes. "That's right. So today we settle everything." I pulled the letter from my coat pocket, unfolded it, and held it up before them. I spoke, my voice cold and steady. "Here it is, everything you believe I owe you. Every meal, every coat, every pill, neatly priced. But you forgot one thing." I ripped the paper in half. The sound of it slicing through the room like thunder in winter. The fragments fluttered to the floor like dead leaves no one bothered to pick up. "Family isn't something you can invoice." My mother's mouth fell open, her face flushing red. You ungrateful child. No one raises a child just to be treated like this." My father growled. "We can take you to court, Clara. There are laws to protect parents." I smirked. "Go ahead. And in court I'll present 5 years of credit card abuse statements, text messages rejecting my children from Thanksgiving, recorded requests for money laced with emotional blackmail." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Want to drag me into the light? I'll bring the whole truth with me. My parents stood frozen. For the first time, their eyes no longer held the gaze of people in control. Instead, it was the look of those who realized they had just lost what they had long assumed was theirs by right. Me. My mother's voice trembled. "You'll regret this." I lowered my head gently. Maybe. But it would be a greater regret to teach my children that love must be purchased with submission. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need anyone to call after me to beg to apologize. I didn't need a final confirmation that I was right. Because for the first time in my life, I understood. My worth wasn't dependent on whether they accepted me. I stepped out of that house, once a cradle, later a cage, and lifted my face to the wind. It was cold, but it was free. When I arrived home, Sophie raced to wrap her arms around my legs, Caleb shouting, "Mommy's home! Mommy's home!" Noah stood there, his eyes soft and steady. I gathered all three of them into my arms. No promises needed, no blessings asked for. We were a family, no invoices, no conditions, just love. And enough of it. On a quiet morning after a snowstorm, I sat on the porch wrapped in a thick wool blanket, holding a cup of hot cocoa. The sky was clear, like a lake untouched by even a single ripple. Sophie and Caleb ran around the yard laughing, throwing handfuls of pure white snow into the air as if scattering tiny dreams. I took a sip of cocoa, feeling the sweetness slowly spreading through my chest, and I realized I had truly stepped out of the storm. No more scripts to follow. No more doors to knock on. No more hearts to beg for love. Just me and this new life. That Christmas, for the first time in years, I didn't stress over picking gifts expensive enough to impress. Didn't force a smile for family photos where I had always been nothing but a shadow. We hung lights on a small tree in the middle of the living room. Sophie secretly tucked red ornaments at the base of the tree, calling it her special secret. Caleb clumsily wrapped handmade presents out of popsicle sticks and colored paper, his eyes glowing with pride. On Christmas Eve, long after all the neighborhood lights had gone out, I found an envelope quietly placed in our mailbox. No return address. I brought it inside, sat by the fireplace, and opened it. Inside was a simple card, handwritten in a familiar script. "I wish things had been different. Olivia." Nothing more. No apology, no justification, just a short line. Like a small cut across still water. I turned the card over and over in my hand. I thought of Olivia, the woman who had always silently stood behind Ethan, witnessing everything, knowing every injustice, but choosing never to intervene. I thought of all those family gatherings where she smiled politely, yet her eyes never once sought out Sophie and Caleb. I thought of myself, how many times I had swallowed tears in silence, believing that if I just tried a little harder, I could be worthy of love. I wasn't angry at Olivia, not anymore, because I understood now, not everyone is brave enough to stand on the right side, especially when doing so means stepping out of their comfort zone. And I knew I had chosen the harder road, the road that didn't require anyone else's validation. The road I would walk, build, and keep lit by my own hands. I folded the card and tucked it away in a drawer, not because I wanted to forget, but because I no longer needed it to remind myself how far I'd come. On New Year's Day, Noah gave me a bracelet. No gemstones, no brand names, just a thin silver band, engraved with 4 simple words, "Enough as you are." I slid it onto my wrist, feeling like for the first time, I wasn't wearing jewelry, but a small vow. No one gets to put a price tag on me again. No one gets to measure my love on a crooked scale. That whole winter, I lived as if relearning how to breathe, slowly, without asking permission, without fearing judgment. Each morning, I made tea, took Sophie and Caleb for walks through the snow, listened to Noah read the newspaper out loud, wrote simple lines in my journal. Today I lived, and that is enough. My mother never called again. Neither did my father. No more late-night demands for help. No more guilt-laden messages. Just a long, absolute silence, as if they had finally realized this daughter no longer existed on the map of their expectations. And strangely, I was grateful for that silence. Not because it was sweet, but because it was honest. Spring came. The first daffodils bloomed along the walkway. Sophie ran into the yard, clutching a tiny bouquet, calling out, "Mommy, Mommy, we found spring." I opened the door and took the little muddy bouquet, breathing in the scent of fresh grass. I knelt down, hugging her tightly, and I knew I no longer searched for spring in places that had frozen me over. Spring and home, from now on, I would grow with my own hands. That afternoon, Noah sat reading. I brewed tea, and the kids sprawled on the floor drawing. No arguments, no pressure. No measuring stares, just laughter, blending with the sunlight, soft as a breath. I wondered, if someone looked into my life now, would they see anything dazzling? No. There was nothing dazzling, just small moments, but enough to warm a heart that had once been shattered. I didn't win, I just stopped losing. And for those of us who have had to fight simply to exist, that is more than enough. People often say that family is the place that will never turn you away. I used to believe that. I used to try, straining, excusing the wounds, just to remain inside that circle, even when sometimes I was nothing more than a faint shadow along its edges. It wasn't until I let go that I finally understood. Family isn't the people tied to you by blood. Family is the people who hold on to you with their whole heart, even when no strings are binding you. I learned that sometimes loving others also means walking away from them, so you don't keep hurting yourself. Sometimes choosing to leave isn't about hatred. It's about love, for the parts of yourself that have not yet been broken. I learned that not everyone who brings you into this world knows how to love you. Not everyone can truly see you, and that isn't your fault. You don't have to fight to be loved. You don't have to force yourself to fit into a family's pre-stitched costume just to earn a few scraps of borrowed warmth. You are worthy of love, whole, unconditional love, even if the first people you hoped would give it to you couldn't. I learned that letting go isn't a failure. Letting go is rescuing yourself from a life someone else designed for you, painted in guilt, burden, and silent expectations. Some relationships survive only because one side keeps enduring. When you stop enduring, they collapse, and that is what needs to happen. I learned that silence is sometimes the most honest answer. When you stop calling first, sending greetings first, reaching out first, you will see clearly who reaches back and who only kept you out of convenience. Silence doesn't make you cruel. It only makes the truth clearer. I learned that my children don't need a broken family to learn about love. They need a home. A place where no one has to ask permission to exist, where no one has to pay for the right to be loved. And I, by walking away, gave them exactly that. Finally, I learned that I don't need anyone's forgiveness for choosing myself. I don't need my story to be accepted as right. I don't need to prove that I am enough. I just need to keep living, keep loving, keep believing, without carrying the weight of survival anymore. If anyone ever asks me whether I regret walking away from my family, I would smile, not bitterly, not boastfully, and say, no, I didn't walk away from family. I simply stopped pretending a broken house was still standing. And that, to me, is true freedom.